Hi everyone, in today's video I'm going to talk about unstructured interviews, what they are, when to use it. So you probably know that there are two types of interviews that are conducted in qualitative research. One is structured interviews and the other is unstructured interviews. So before you conduct unstructured interviews, you must know when they are used, why they are used, and the possible advantages and disadvantages of conducting such interviews. So, firstly, what are unstructured interviews? Now, in unstructured interviews, the researcher does not have a set of questions that they want to ask. It's flexible, spontaneous, and a bit open ended questions. The researcher does not go with a specific plan in mind, but this doesn't mean that the researcher has no knowledge of that topic. The researcher has in-depth knowledge of that topic, but they go in more with an exploratory mind, that they want to find out more about the concept that they have been studying about. I will give you an example. Let's say you are studying about the challenges that refugees face when they come into a certain country, or they come into a developed country. From a developing country they come into a developed country, or the challenges that the refugees face while living in a new society. So you must have read a lot about this topic, and you are aware of the challenges that they face in different countries, but you want to know about the challenges that the refugees face in your country or your state. Let's say there are refugees from Afghanistan who have come into Australia, but even in Australia, they have come and settled into a particular place like an island in Tasmania. And now you want to find out how are the refugees adjusting to not only a foreign way of life but an island life which they are not used to. So people in Afghanistan are not used to having seas and oceans, and they are coming and settling in an isolated place like Tasmania, an island. What are the specific challenges that they are facing? Now, of course, this means that you have an in-depth knowledge about the challenges that refugees normally face in other countries, but you want to know specifically from the refugees that you interview about the specific challenges that they are facing. Also helps you to confirm all that you have been reading about this topic. So unstructured interview does not mean that the researcher has no knowledge, they go unprepared and they ask a random set of questions. No, it's not like that. What the researcher does is they want to know more about the concept or the phenomena from the research participants, and they don't want to bind them under a structured set pattern. What they want to do is basically allow the research participant to explain their perceptions, their thoughts, their beliefs, their experiences openly, and draw from that data and confirm on their research findings. The advantages are, of course, that it is more spontaneous, it is more flexible, it is more open ended. So the participants are allowed to speak what they have in mind or what is their true experience. What happens with structured questions is that because the interviewer is asking a set pattern of questions, a set of questions, often the research participants are not able to expand on a particular belief or a phenomena or a perception or a value. Whereas unstructured interviews, you can explore as much as you want when you find that a particular phenomena is what you want to know more about. The participant also is allowed to speak freely and not only answer the questions that are being asked by the interviewer. They speak freely about what they want to talk about. So that is the advantage of unstructured questions. Also, unstructured questions, they allow the research participant to form a bond with the interviewer. So the research participant and the interviewer, they form a bond because the conversation is more casual, it is free flowing, it does not seem like an interview, it does not seem like it is a very formalized process. And of course, what helps here is that the interviewer, and this is another advantage, the interviewer gets to know more about the concept, in-depth knowledge about the concept. Many concepts that are not maybe written in books or journal papers, you get to know directly from the research participants. The disadvantages, of course, is that it can be quite time consuming, it can be quite costly to administer, and because it is open ended and flexible and spontaneous, what one participant may tell you may not completely match with the other participant because it is about your own perceptions, your own experiences. It may be a completely a different set of data. So it becomes very difficult for the researcher to compare one set of data with the other and go on. The other problem is that when you have unstructured interviews, you can't interview hundreds of people. You Because it takes time, it takes money, it is a long process, and the data coding and the data analysis also is a time-consuming process. So normally researchers stick to a small set of data, a small set of research participants. The problem with that is that often it is not generalizable. The findings are not generalizable because of the small sample size. So that becomes a problem with unstructured. Of course, you can code data. There are many tools online. One is called the Delve tool, I think, that can be used to code and analyze the unstructured data. But it is a bit of a challenge for the researcher because they are not prepared for the data that they will receive. Whereas in structured interviews, you have a set pattern of questions. The interviewees are answering those set pattern of questions, and then you can compare the data that you get from one to the data obtained from the other based on how they are answering the individual set of questions. Unstructured interviews, you can use four ways of conducting them. You can use in-depth interviews, which is one-on-one. You can use focus groups, which is one researcher and many participants. You can use narratives, and you can use oral histories. So let me just tell you a little bit about narratives and oral history. Is that in narratives you try to and get to know about the experience of the research participant. For example, if you want to know if the research participant, what impact of sexual abuse has on someone's life, you can use the narrative. Whereas oral history is more about knowing the historical or a cultural or something that happened in the past. You want to know more about it. For example, how was it like living in the Depression era, or how did the global financial crisis compare in 2008, or people who went through a certain plague or a disease way back in the 60s or 50s, or knowing more about the drainage systems in the 40s and comparing it to the one that we have now. So knowing more about a historical or a cultural event, whereas narratives is more about personal events, personal experiences, personal history. So people, let's say you want to compare people who came from India to Pakistan after partition, or vice versa, and you want to know about their story, their experiences, what they experienced during the partition. You can use their personal experiences, you can use narratives, but if you want to know about the phenomena of partition, then you use oral history. So that is one example of when to use what. Remember, in each of these data collection methods, you must know how you are recording the data, because recording the data and then making notes from it, it becomes very important. So while you are recording, make sure you have multiple means of doing so. You can use a video camera if you have the permission, you can use a microphone, you can use a laptop, you can jot down data by hand as well. So that way you have multiple ways of collecting data, but decide on how you want to collect that data. Make sure that that is in place before you start interviewing, because you might lose a lot of valuable data. Remember, in one-to-one, of course, you try to form a rapport. That is the in-depth interviews. Because you're interviewing one-on-one, you may be meeting them a few times as well, so that rapport needs to be developed. Whereas in focus group, of course, you will have a group of people and you are trying to get some responses from them. Remember, some people may be very quiet, some people may be very outspoken, so you have to make sure that you get responses from everyone. In narratives as well, you have to make sure that the person you're asking questions from is very comfortable telling you their story and experience, especially if it's a sensitive topic like sexual abuse or domestic violence. In oral history, of course, in oral history, you have to remember that some of the facts people say may be a bit construed, or maybe in their own mind they might be some false memory. So you have to make sure that you ask them the questions in different ways to make sure that what they are saying is consistent throughout about a particular period or phenomena. So these are the advantages and disadvantages of using structured interviews versus unstructured interviews versus structured interviews. I hope you like this video. Please share, like, and put in the comment section what you think, or whether I missed something or not. But I'll see you soon with my next video. Bye for now, guys.